Hi all, in this video we'll be looking at how to do well in a paper 2 part D. The best way to do well in part D is to do well in parts A, B and C. Paper 2s follow a consistent format. We have part A, where in each part, worth 2 marks each, you'll be asked to write a definition or state two things. We've seen definitions before. For stating two things, it might be state two functions of a central bank. So the revision that you do on definitions will really pay off here. You'll be able to score 4 out of your 20 marks, that's 20%, in about 1 minute. So learn your definitions. Part B and C are worth 4 marks each. You will most often be asked to explain an idea with a diagram. You should aim to have the written component be no more than 50 words. That will allow you to cover the main points. These parts do not require a lot of depth. Sometimes you'll be asked to explain a concept and not be asked for a diagram. In these cases, you may need to write a bit more, but you should still try to write no more than 75 words. Every past paper 2, part B or C question is collated on the Google site, as are the mark schemes. So you've got ample opportunity to practice these well. By the time final exams come around, your goal should be to complete parts A, B and C in 15 minutes. You get in, you get out, you take your 12 marks and you move on to part D. Many of you should be able to score 12 out of 12 for parts A, B and C. That will already put you into the 5 grade boundary without having to do any deep discussion type questions. Part D is worth 8 of your 20 marks, but you should devote the majority of your time. So I'm looking for about half an hour, as the other parts, as we've seen, require much less depth. So moving on to the question. Using information from the text data and your knowledge of economics, evaluate the economic effects of the imposition of a minimum price for cigarettes. Now, an often overlooked aspect of paper 2 part D is that there is still need for definitions, and you should always look to incorporate a diagram. Here we can see that a definition would likely be price floor, and you should be looking to include a price floor diagram somewhere and using it for analysis. It will most often be an evaluate or discuss question, which both require you to consider multiple points of view and reach a conclusion. One of the beauties of paper 2, however, is that there is a text which prompts you. It gives you ideas of what to write. So you should read the text and highlight the parts that will be relevant for your response. So I'm just going to quickly do that now. These are the things that I might talk about. Direct tax and tobacco. Minimum price would distort fair competition in the market. Aim of ensuring high tobacco prices can be done with a tax. We need a high price to discourage smoking. Learn how to highlight. What are you doing? There's already legislation to ban tobacco advertising and promotion. So that's a complementary policy. They can prevent retail outlets from making young people feel attracted to buying cigarettes. And 30% of our population smoke. Wow, I'm doing terribly at this. Let's just say this is highlighted. 30% of our population still smoke and 7,000 die from tobacco diseases. Artificially fixing a minimum price would not be effective, so you can explain that. Demand for tobacco is inelastic and is against the free market. Now, I should always take a couple of minutes to plan before you start, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at arguments for and against, partly from what I've highlighted, and I'll put into these 2 columns. Now, this question also asks that I use my knowledge of economics to evaluate the effects. So one way to do that is to develop my own ideas, my own arguments. So there we'll use the SLAP method, which we've gone through extensively before. So I'm just going to put in my pros and cons here. So I've got 7,000 die from tobacco. So this is why we would put in a price floor. Cigarettes, less appealing. We want them to be less appealing, right? So I've got these from the text, that's why I'm quoting the paragraph. can especially affect young people. That's from paragraph 4. And I'm coming up with my own ideas here. So we've got reduced healthcare costs. So this opens up other things that governments can spend their money on. And I've got reduced negative externalities of smoking. We all know about what those externalities, what those external costs are. Then I've got some arguments against the policy. Perhaps that an indirect tax might be more effective. Demand is inelastic. We can have informal markets come up, black markets, underground markets, parallel markets, all the same thing. We could say that government revenue can be generated from a tax instead. It's an argument to use a tax instead of a price floor. Okay, so I've got my ideas, and so I've got a bit of an idea of the types of things I'm going to be writing about. Now, coming back to this, your knowledge of economics, this is really important, and this can be overlooked by students, especially ones that I've seen examined. The way I like to think about this is that an intelligent person, and for example, my mum, she's very intelligent, but she's never done any economics course, but she would be able to look at this article, because she's a good reader, and she would be able to pick out arguments for and against. She would be able to see in paragraph 5 that demand for tobacco is inelastic. She would be able to see that that is a point against putting in place a price floor, but she doesn't know what inelastic demand means, but she's still smart enough to be able to put that in. So you want to be able to set yourself apart from people that haven't done an economics course. So you can't just parrot the text, you've got to expand upon it. A low performing student, someone who's intelligent but hasn't studied the course that well, might write something like this. Furthermore, imposing a minimum. Demand for tobacco is inelastic. So they can write this, and it's almost like they're trying to trick the examiner into thinking that they understand it, because they're writing in such a way with a bit of confidence that they understand it. But all they're really doing is copying from the text. This isn't really even worth writing. If this is all you're going to write, it's not worth writing. It won't really be rewarded. So a high-performing student might start with this as a base, but then add due to tobacco, it's lack of close substitutes, okay, due to the addictive nature of tobacco and its lack of close substitutes. So there we're showing that we understand the factors of elasticity of demand. And you can also see how you could even relate this to the diagram as well and show even deeper understanding. Decrease the quantity consumed. You could show the points on a diagram as well. So this addition shows understanding. This will be rewarded. Something else you need to see how I've written paragraph 5 here. That's not just for your benefit to see where I'm taking that from. It's what you need to do when you use the text. Without direct reference to the text, the most you can score is 5 out of 8. So you don't want the examiner to miss your references. Doing it like this, just writing paragraph number there, it's like slapping the examiner in the face with your reference. They won't miss it, so you will get rewarded. Now, in terms of structure, some like to answer with all the positives and then argue all of the negatives. This isn't a bad approach. However, as an examiner, some of the best responses I've seen have linked different ideas together and have argued them that way. It's a great way of showing discussion. For example, make the argument above about tobacco having inelastic demand to link it with a different idea that they could have. So you could add to this. You could say, however, I'm supposed to say demand. Demand is unlikely to be perfectly inelastic. So many consumers will at least smoke less, and some will quit. And also, for something even a bit deeper than that, we know that demand becomes more elastic as time goes on. So even though it might be quite inelastic in the short term, maybe short term, the policy may become much more useful over a longer time period. So I think it's better to link the ideas together here rather than have them perhaps even be on separate pages. So I think this really shows some quite deep discussion, and this is the sort of thing that I think you should be able to do, and that's really required to score in the upper boundary, so 7 or 8 marks out of 8 here. So you'll do this. Once you've explained and outlined your arguments, you should come to a conclusion, and be aware that you have to actually take a side. This will need only be a few sentences, as what the main thrust of what the examiner is looking for is in the text that you've already written. It's not the conclusion. But this is a chance to remind the examiner of the great work that you've already done, and this will help them reward you or make it easy for the examiner to give you high marks and for them to be able to justify giving you high marks. Okay, so we will practice a lot of these in class, but this might be hopefully a good thing for you to refer back to over time.